The Amber Room is often hailed as one of the world's most alluring lost treasures, a masterpiece of craftsmanship that disappeared under mysterious circumstances during World War II. For centuries, it dazzled visitors with its golden luminescence, intricate carvings, and unparalleled elegance. Today, the fate of this magnificent room remains shrouded in questions. Was it destroyed, hidden away in a secret bunker, or spirited out of Eastern Europe? The story of the Amber Room begins in the early 18th century, when artisans in Prussia created a space unlike any other. Commissioned by Frederick I, the first king in Prussia, the room was designed by master sculptor Andreas Schluter and crafted by Danish amber artisan Gottfried Wolfram. And yes, you heard me right. His title was King in Prussia, not King of Prussia, due to the fact that he was also the Elector of Brandenburg in the Holy Roman Empire. But let's get back to the Amber Room itself, because trust me, the last thing we need is a detour into the intricacies of the HRE. Over 13,000 pounds of amber were used, carefully formed into Baroque panels and embellished with gold leaf and mirrors. The result was a breathtaking chamber that virtually glowed when illuminated by candlelight. It was installed in the Charlottenburg Palace in Berlin, where it instantly became the pride of the Prussian court. However, the Amber Room's location would soon change. In 1716, Frederick William I, the king's son and successor, gifted the room to Tsar Peter the Great of Russia. This diplomatic gesture helped strengthen relations between Prussia and Russia. The ornate panels were dismantled and then transported to St. Petersburg, eventually finding their home in the Catherine Palace. Once installed, the Amber Room was expanded and refined by Russian, German, and Italian artisans. By the late 18th century, it spanned about 180 square feet and contained several more elaborate adornments, including mosaic panels from Florence. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, the Amber Room became synonymous with Russian imperial splendor. Visitors who were granted access to the Catherine Palace often remarked upon the room's almost surreal luminosity. Because amber is a fossilized tree resin, it refracts light in a way that produces a warm, golden glow. Combined with gilded accents and mirrors, the space created an atmosphere akin to being enveloped in pure sunshine. This period of relative peace and prosperity in Russia allowed the Amber Room to remain untouched, guarded as one of the crown jewels of the Russian Empire. The 20th century would be much less kind to Russia in terms of stability, to put it very mildly. The multiple revolutions, the humiliation in the Russo-Japanese War, and 2 world wars would soon threaten the stability of many historical artifacts. The Amber Room's disappearance coincided with the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. As Axis troops advanced into Russian territory, curators at the Catherine Palace tried to dismantle and hide the panels to protect them from looting. However, because the amber had become brittle with age, the administrators eventually decided to leave the room intact, hoping that its fragile state would dissuade attempts to remove it. In October 1941, German soldiers entered the palace and discovered the glittering treasure. The panels were quickly disassembled and shipped to Königsberg, present-day Kaliningrad, where they were put on display in the city's Castle Museum. For nearly 2 years, the Amber Room remained in Königsberg. In August 1944, British bombers targeted the city, causing widespread destruction. Soon thereafter, Soviet forces advanced from the east, and the German authorities attempted to evacuate or hide key cultural treasures. The precise details of what happened next have never been confirmed. Some accounts suggest the Amber Room was packed into crates and loaded onto a ship, while others claim it was concealed in a bunker beneath Königsberg Castle. By the time Soviet troops arrived and seized the city in April 1945, the Amber Room had vanished without a trace. In the immediate post-war years, the Soviet government launched a comprehensive search for the Amber Room. Investigators questioned former German officials and local residents, inspected bunkers, and scoured castle ruins, but they found nothing. Even the city's underground passages and salt mines in the surrounding area were examined. The Soviet Union was eager to locate the room, both for its immense cultural value and as a political symbol. Yet not a single amber panel was recovered, sparking theories and fueling speculation for decades to come. Some officials theorized that the Amber Room, already in a rather fragile state, was destroyed in the final bombing raids on Königsberg. However, no conclusive evidence supported that claim, and fragments or remnants were never identified in the city's rubble. As the Cold War intensified, the search lost momentum, turning into a hushed affair that mostly interested art historians, treasure hunters, and a small circle of Soviet bureaucrats. It would be decades before a renewed wave of interest surged with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed about the Amber Room's final hiding place. One long-standing rumor suggests that it sank to the bottom of the Baltic Sea when the ship transporting it was torpedoed. Another theory holds that the Germans concealed it in a secret bunker somewhere in Poland or the Czech Republic. Enthusiasts and treasure hunters have spent untold hours poring over maps, diaries, and archival documents, hoping to uncover a clue that reveals its location. Several intriguing leads have emerged over the years. In the 1990s, a German search team claimed to have found evidence of a hidden room in an old mine near Dresden, suspecting it housed the stolen amber panels. Investigations, however, failed to yield any trace of the missing amber panels. Polish explorers have also conducted digs in rural areas where they believe trains carrying stolen art might have been abandoned during the war's chaotic final days. To date, no Amber Room artifacts have been conclusively recovered from these efforts. While the original Amber Room remains lost, a magnificent reconstruction stands in its place at the Catherine Palace. The work began in 1979 under the direction of Soviet authorities, employing amber artisans who studied black and white photographs and any surviving documentation of the original room. Using traditional methods of carving and inlay, they painstakingly recreated each panel. The project was finally completed in 2003, in time for the 300th anniversary of St. Petersburg. Durandal, the legendary sword of Roland, a paladin under Charlemagne, is one of the most renowned artifacts in medieval history. Renowned for its supposed indestructibility and sharpness, the blade is central to various tales, most notably the Song of Roland. In this work, it's described as containing sacred relics within its golden hilt: a tooth of St. Peter, blood of St. Basil, hair of St. Denis, and the clothing of the Virgin Mary. These relics were believed to imbue the sword with divine power, making it a formidable weapon against adversaries. The poem narrates that during the Battle of Roncevaux Pass, Roland, facing overwhelming forces, used the blade to slay numerous enemies, including severing the right arm of the Saracen king. Fearing that the sword might fall into enemy hands, Roland attempted to destroy it by striking it against marble blocks, but it remained unscathed. Ultimately, Roland concealed the sword beneath his body as he lay dying, alongside his elephant tusk hunting horn. Various legends surround Durandal's origin. One account states that an angel presented the sword to Charlemagne, who then bestowed it to his most loyal paladin. Another tale from a 12th century poem recounts that a young Charlemagne, fighting for Christendom in Spain, acquired the weapon after slaying an Andalusian prince. Additionally, the Song of Aspremont describes Roland defeating the Saracen Aumon, son of King Agallant, and claiming Durandal as his prize. Local lore in Rocamadour, France, adds another layer to Durandal's mythos. According to tradition, instead of dying with Durandal hidden under his body, Roland called on the Archangel Michael for assistance. With the assistance of Michael, he was able to throw the sword several hundred kilometers across the border into France, where it came to rest in Rocamadour. There, it was deposited in the chapel of Mary before allegedly being stolen by Henry the Young King, who was serving as junior king of England in 1183. After this event, numerous replicas have been created, though they have all been stolen as well, with the most recent replica having been stolen in June 2024. The historicity of Durandal remains a subject of debate among historians and literary scholars. While the sword is prominently featured in medieval epics like the Song of Roland, its existence as a real weapon is highly questionable. Most scholars argue that Durandal is a product of medieval romanticization rather than a historical artifact. One of the central points against Durandal's historicity is its portrayal in legend. It's described as containing sacred relics and being indestructible, attributes consistent with mythic storytelling rather than historical fact. Such embellishments align with the broader purpose of epic poetry, to inspire and glorify national or religious identity rather than document real events. Proponents of Durandal's possible historicity point to the medieval practice of creating legendary narratives around real artifacts. It's conceivable that a sword belonging to a notable Frankish knight like Roland, who is a well-documented historical figure, became a focal point for myth-making. Additionally, the Battle of Roncevaux Pass, where Durandal is said to have been wielded in a last stand by Roland, was a historical event, and Roland was slain in this battle. Raphael's Portrait of a Young Man, painted in 1514, is a significant work from the Italian High Renaissance. The subject's identity remains unverified, though many scholars have traditionally regarded it as Raphael's self-portrait. The facial features are perceived by specialists as compatible with, if not clearly identical to, the only undoubted self-portrait by Raphael in his fresco, The School of Athens, at the Vatican. The portrait depicts a richly dressed and confidently poised young man, embodying the elegance and sophistication characteristic of Raphael's work during this period. The subject's attire and demeanor reflect the cultivated mannerist expression prevalent among the noble class in early 16th century Italy. Before World War II, the painting was part of the Czartoryski Museum's collection in Krakow, Poland. The museum, established by Princess Isabella Czartoryska in the early 19th century, housed numerous masterpieces, including works by Leonardo da Vinci and Rembrandt. These works were acquired by the Czartoryski family during their extensive travels across Europe, with this particular work being acquired in 1798. Interestingly, the provenance of the painting prior to its acquisition by the Czartoryski family in 1798 remains largely undocumented. Specific records detailing its ownership during the intervening centuries are virtually non-existent. In 1939, as Germany invaded Poland, the Czartoryski family attempted to safeguard their collection by hiding key pieces, including Raphael's Portrait of a Young Man, in a residence in Sienova. Despite these efforts, the Gestapo discovered the hidden artworks. Hans Frank, the German-appointed Governor-General of occupied Poland, took possession of the painting. He displayed it prominently in his residence at Wawel Castle in Krakow. As the war neared its end in January 1945, Frank transported several artworks, including Raphael's portrait, to his villa in Germany. After his arrest by American forces in May 1945, many looted artworks were recovered, but Portrait of a Young Man was not among them. Its whereabouts have remained unknown since then, giving rise to significant speculation. One prominent idea is that the painting may now reside in a private collection, possibly in Germany, the United States, Switzerland, or Russia. During and after the war, clandestine art transactions were common, and it's plausible that the artwork was discreetly acquired by a private collector who has since kept it hidden. Some experts suspect the painting may even have been passed down through generations. Under this theory, its owners are either unaware of its historical significance or purposefully keeping it concealed to avoid legal or financial consequences. This theory remains compelling given the secrecy that often surrounds private art holdings. Another possibility is that the painting was destroyed during the chaotic final days of the war. This theory gained attention due to dramatizations like the 2014 film The Monuments Men, which portrayed German forces deliberately destroying stolen artworks. While no evidence confirms this scenario, the destruction of countless cultural artifacts during the war makes it a sobering possibility. If true, it would mean that the portrait of a young man is lost forever, joining the long list of cultural treasures irretrievably damaged in wartime. A less grim but equally plausible theory is that the painting may simply have been misplaced during the extensive relocations of art throughout the war. In their efforts to safeguard or hide cultural treasures, officials from various countries moved countless artworks into storage. Some items became lost or forgotten in these vast repositories, particularly in the post-war period, when the focus shifted to rebuilding cities and infrastructure. It's possible that Raphael's work lies dormant in one of these storerooms, waiting to be rediscovered. Finally, there's the theory that the painting is held by individuals who unknowingly acquired it during or after the war. Looted artworks often changed hands multiple times, and some pieces were sold without their origins being fully disclosed. In this scenario, the portrait of a young man might be hanging in someone's home, unrecognized for the masterpiece it truly is. Abaskun was a prominent medieval port situated on the southeastern shore of the Caspian Sea, in the region historically known as Golistan. What makes the city most interesting is that despite its prominence in the Middle Ages, its fate remains unknown. Its exact location remains uncertain, but scholars suggest it was near the mouth of the Gorgonrud River, near the Iran-Turkmenistan border at the Caspian Sea. Arab and Persian geographers noted that Abaskun was within a 1 to 3 day journey from the city of Gorgon. During its zenith, Abaskun thrived as a bustling trading hub. Merchants from the city traveled up the Caspian Sea and into the Volga River, connecting the city into the extensive Volga trade route that ran up to the Baltic Sea. Abaskun was renowned for exporting goods like cloth, rawhide, and exotic seabirds' feathers, which were prized for garment decoration. In the 10th century, the city boasted a citadel constructed of brick and a mosque situated in the market quarter, reflecting its architectural and cultural development. However, Abaskun's prosperity also made it a target for invasions. The Rus, seafaring warriors from the north, conducted several raids on the city. Between 864 and 884, they launched a series of initial small-scale attacks. The wealth discovered led to subsequent large-scale pillaging, occurring in 909 or 910, and then again in 913. It's thought that this greatly diminished the city's prosperity and importance. In 1220, the city's narrative took a dramatic turn when Muhammad II, the Shah of Khwarezm, fleeing the Mongol invasion, sought refuge on an island near Abaskun. Following this event, historical records ceased to mention the city, suggesting a rapid decline. By the 14th century, Persian geographer Hamdallah Mustafi reported that the city had submerged beneath the Caspian Sea. He attributed this submersion to a rise in sea levels, possibly caused by the Oxus River temporarily altering its course to flow into the Caspian instead of the Aral Sea. However, this geographer had no first-hand knowledge of the city and didn't provide any timelines for when this may have occurred. The disappearance of Abaskun has intrigued historians and archaeologists alike. Some agree that natural factors, such as rising sea levels and shifting river courses, led to its destruction. Still others suggest that the city was submerged under a man-made deluge, the Mongols under Genghis Khan. One speculative theory, emphasizing that it remains purely a hypothesis, suggests that his relentless hatred for Muhammad of Khwarezm drew his attention to Abaskun. After Muhammad fled to an island near this once thriving port on the Caspian Sea, Genghis Khan's forces may have turned their wrath upon it in reprisal. The Khwarezmian Shah had provoked the Mongols by executing Mongol envoys, incurring Genghis Khan's legendary wrath. Many historians agree that the Mongol invasion marked a decisive turning point in the region, but no direct evidence confirms the city's destruction by the Mongols. Fueling this possibility is Genghis Khan's reputation for devastating entire cities if they were connected to his enemies. Abaskun's strategic position and bustling trade networks would have made it a tempting prize. The fact that historical records all but vanish after the Shah's stay hints at something catastrophic, a swift and total Mongol assault. The lack of definitive archaeological evidence and the ambiguity of medieval sources make the tale of Abaskun's downfall an intriguing, yet still unproven, piece of the Mongol legacy. Without new archaeological discoveries or a fresh discovery in a newly discovered primary source, the fate of Abaskun will remain one of history's mysteries. Göbekli Tepe, located in southeastern Turkey, has been hailed as the world's oldest known temple complex, revolutionizing understanding of prehistoric societies. Dating back over 11,000 years, this site was constructed by early Neolithic humans during a period when farming and settled life were still in their infancy. The site consists of large circular structures known as enclosures, each containing massive T-shaped stone pillars. These pillars, some towering over 5 meters high, are adorned with intricate carvings of animals like snakes, vultures, wild boars, and foxes, often depicted in relief. These carvings are believed to have had symbolic significance, potentially relating to religious or spiritual practices. Interestingly, no evidence of permanent habitation has been found at Göbekli Tepe, suggesting that it was a ceremonial site for semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers rather than a village or town. One of the most remarkable aspects of Göbekli Tepe is the advanced engineering and organization required to build it. The people who constructed this site did so without metal tools or domesticated animals, raising questions about how they managed to transport and erect the enormous stone pillars. This has led archaeologists to hypothesize that Göbekli Tepe may have been a gathering place where different groups of people came together for religious rituals or social events. Excavations at Göbekli Tepe have revealed 3 main levels of construction. The oldest, known as Level 3, features the most complex and monumental architecture, including large stone circles with richly carved pillars. Later levels, particularly Level 2, show a shift towards more rectangular enclosures, indicating a possible evolution in architectural style over time. Interestingly, the oldest level appears to be the most advanced, raising questions about how and why construction techniques seem to have regressed in later phases. The carvings on the pillars are not just decorative but are believed to be deeply symbolic, possibly representing totems or spiritual beliefs. For example, Enclosure A is dominated by carvings of snakes, which may have had mythological or religious importance in the region. Similarly, Enclosure C features depictions of wild boars, while Enclosure B is known for its carvings of foxes. These animal motifs are repeated throughout the site and seem to reflect a sophisticated symbolic system consistent with early spiritual or religious beliefs. One of the most intriguing mysteries surrounding Göbekli Tepe is its intentional burial. Around 8000 BC, the entire site was deliberately covered with dirt, preserving it for millennia. The reasons for this burial remain unclear, though some researchers speculate it could have been part of a ritual or a way to mark the end of its use. Others suggest it may have been an effort to preserve the sanctity of the site, or simply a practical measure as the site fell out of use. Göbekli Tepe has significantly upended previous theories about the development of human civilization. Before its discovery, it was widely believed that large, complex societies could only develop after the advent of agriculture. However, Göbekli Tepe demonstrates that even hunter-gatherers were capable of organizing large-scale construction projects and engaging in complex social and religious activities. Some scholars now believe that sites like Göbekli Tepe may have played a role in the eventual transition to agriculture. These scholars suggest the need to feed and organize large groups of people in the area could have led to the increased domestication of plants and animals. The civilization responsible for building Göbekli Tepe remains largely mysterious, as no written records or clear evidence of a unified political structure have been found. The builders of Göbekli Tepe are theorized to have lived in small, mobile groups and relied on foraging, hunting, and fishing for survival. Today, Göbekli Tepe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and continues to be a focus of archaeological research. Its significance lies not only in its age, but in what it reveals about the social and cultural capabilities of early human societies. Prester John was a legendary Christian king who was thought to reign over a wealthy and mighty land somewhere beyond Europe's known frontiers. For centuries, European monarchs were tantalized by stories of this distant ruler who could, if found, become a key ally in the struggle against the Islamic powers of the Near East. The earliest known mention of Prester John appears in the mid-12th century. In 1145, Otto of Freising, a German chronicler and bishop, recorded a remarkable conversation with the bishop of Jabala in Syria, who had told him of a mighty Christian king ruling in the east. This Christian ruler, said to belong to the Nestorian Church, was regarded by European Christians as a distant but potent ally who might help retake the Holy Land. About 2 decades later, in 1165, a mysterious letter began to circulate across Europe, claiming to be from Prester John himself. Addressed to various European rulers and including the Pope, this so-called letter of Prester John described an opulent kingdom in an unknown land. Although it's now believed to have been a forgery created by one or more enterprising authors, the letter captivated medieval Europe's imagination. Initially, people thought Prester John's domain might lie somewhere in the Far East, possibly within the mysterious bounds of India. Note that this was a loosely defined region in medieval thought that often included East Africa and much of Asia. The existence of prosperous Christian communities in parts of Asia, notably the Nestorians who had established enclaves as far as China, made the notion plausible. Moreover, travelers' accounts, limited contact with distant Christians, and ongoing crusading ambitions combined to spark persistent rumors. Over time, as Europeans acquired a slightly better sense of Asian geography, Prester John's supposed location began shifting on the maps. When it became harder to imagine such a powerful Christian king hidden in Asia, people started to look toward Africa, particularly Ethiopia, whose Christian kingdom was known to Europe. By the 14th and 15th centuries, many Europeans had become convinced that the Ethiopian emperor might be the elusive Prester John, or at least his descendant. Ethiopia had a long Christian tradition dating back to antiquity, and its rulers did claim a lineage that stretched to the biblical Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. Contacts between Europe and Ethiopia increased as European powers, especially Portugal, sought new allies against the Ottoman Empire and its vassals in the Red Sea and Indian Ocean regions. Portuguese explorers ventured around Africa's Cape of Good Hope and established direct trade routes to the east. This provided them the opportunity to engage with Ethiopia's Christian kingdom. While the Ethiopians were real Christians with a distinct church, they certainly weren't the fabulously wealthy and all-powerful king and kingdom described by the Prester John legends. That said, in the minds of some Europeans, these Ethiopians, with their vast gold reserves, could fill the role of Prester John's kingdom regardless. But let's step back to the early 13th century for a moment to discuss a less likely candidate for the kingdom of Prester John. In the early 13th century, as news of the Mongol conquests drifted into Europe, a swirl of rumors and misconceptions took shape. Genghis Khan and his Mongol hordes completely destroyed significant portions of the Muslim world. Many who heard of this brutal conquest thought that this powerful ruler must be the legendary Prester John, given the states he appeared to be targeting at that point. For those who are unaware, the Mongols weren't known for their peaceful policies towards any of their neighbors, to put it extremely mildly. Notably, this was fueled by the fact that a small but significant minority of the Mongols were indeed Nestorian Christians. It took Europeans time to fully realize that the Mongol Empire, while including Nestorian Christians among its subjects, didn't operate under a Christian banner. As more reliable information filtered back, it became clear that Genghis Khan and his successors were not the legendary Prester John, but a wholly different and far more dangerous force. The historical development of the Prester John legend can't be separated from the religious and political context of the time. Crusader Europe, struggling to hold on to the Holy Land, desperately wanted a powerful Christian ally in the East. The papacy and various European monarchs imagined that Prester John's armies could arrive from behind enemy lines, crushing Muslim forces and restoring Christian control over Jerusalem. This strategic desire may have driven the circulation and acceptance of the letter of Prester John. The letter offered hope and fueled centuries of fruitless search, becoming one of the medieval world's great geographic and religious enigmas. By the time the Age of Discovery gave Europeans a more accurate global picture, the notion of an undiscovered Christian kingdom seemed increasingly unlikely. As explorers mapped the coasts of Africa, sailed to India, and made contact with East Asia, they encountered many wondrous lands but no elusive Christian potentate, as described in the legend. By the early modern period, it was fully accepted that Prester John never existed, but that does leave us with a significant ongoing historical mystery. Who forged the letter from Prester John that was circulated around the monarchs of Europe, and for what purpose? The question of whether King Arthur was based on a historical figure or a purely legendary construct has fascinated scholars and enthusiasts for over a millennium now. While later medieval romances depict him as a chivalrous king surrounded by noble knights and magical advisors, the earliest sources that mention Arthur paint a far more realistic picture. Even today, historians don't agree on whether he existed as a real person, a warlord, tribal leader, or king, in the tumultuous post-Roman landscape of Britain, or whether he was a composite of multiple historical figures and mythic archetypes that grew into legend over time. The earliest references to an Arthur-like figure appear not in grand histories or detailed biographies, but in sparse, often cryptic texts. One of the oldest and most widely cited possible references is found in the work of Gildas, a 6th century British cleric. In his text, De Excidio et Conquestu Britanniae from the 6th century, Gildas discussed the battles between native Britons and Romano-Britons and the Saxon conquerors. He never explicitly names Arthur, but he does mention leaders and battles that later sources would connect to the Arthurian tradition. Notably, he does mention Ambrosius Aurelianus as a Romano-Briton leader who fought against the Saxons. This absence of any direct reference is telling. If Arthur was truly a well-known leader of Gildas's time, why did he remain unnamed? The next major piece of evidence comes from the work attributed to Nennius, a Welsh historian who wrote the Historia Brittonum in the 9th century. Perhaps most importantly in this text, Arthur is finally mentioned by name. Nennius lists 12 battles fought against the invading Saxons, supposedly under Arthur's command. Although this account puts Arthur into a historical context, it doesn't provide conclusive proof of his existence. The work is considered semi-legendary and was compiled from earlier oral traditions, possibly mixing historical fact with local folklore. Notably, many cite this work as proof of an oral history of a Welsh tribal chief being the inspiration for Arthur. There are no independent sources confirming these battles or Arthur's leadership. Still, Nennius is an important stepping stone in the development of the Arthurian narrative, as he is the earliest source to clearly position Arthur as a warrior figure battling Saxons. Another early source worth mentioning is the Annales Cambriae, compiled in the 10th century, which records 2 events associated with Arthur. It discusses the Battle of Badon and the Battle of Camlan, the latter supposedly where Arthur and Mordred fell. These annals are brief, leaving no solid clues as to whether Arthur was a genuine historical character or simply a legendary hero inserted into the historical timeline to explain past events. By the 12th century, the narrative of Arthur had taken a decidedly literary turn. Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia is one of the most influential works in shaping the Arthurian story. Geoffrey claimed to present a reliable history of Britain's kings, but modern scholars universally agree that his work is a blend of fact, legend, and pure invention. In it, Arthur emerges not as a mere war chief, but as a grand king presiding over a glorious court. This portrayal, though compelling and immensely influential in medieval literature and beyond, significantly departs from the sparse militaristic mentions that might hint at a historical figure. Instead, Geoffrey's narrative served as a catalyst for the rich body of Arthurian legends developed by later medieval writers, who added elements like the Round Table, the Grail, and courtly love. Notably, the Monmouth account quite clearly isn't set in late antiquity, but rather is very firmly rooted in ideas and technology of the Middle Ages. Modern historical inquiry into the question of Arthur's historicity often focuses on the socio-political climate of 5th and 6th century Britain. After the withdrawal of Roman legions, Britain faced waves of invasions and migrations. Several British warlords and chieftains rose to defend their territories against Saxon encroachment, and it's plausible that the figure of Arthur originated as an idealized war chief. Archaeologists and historians have searched for evidence, fortifications, battle sites, names in contemporary documents, but so far, nothing definitively points to an individual named Arthur. The absence of contemporary documentation is a significant problem, but doesn't necessarily discount the existence of an Arthur-like figure. Britain in the post-Roman era wasn't producing detailed written histories comparable to those of the classical world. The surviving texts are scarce, and many were compiled centuries after the events they describe. As you may have gathered, modern scholars have expressed significant skepticism about the idea of Arthur as a historical individual. Others who advocate for a historical Arthur generally rely on significant speculation to do so. The debate remains unresolved, and serious historians tend to remain agnostic on Arthur. They generally acknowledge that while there might have been a real individual or individuals who inspired the legends, the stories we know are saturated with myth and literary embellishment. Let's face it, the King Arthur we picture, presiding over a chivalrous court, leading a cadre of chivalrous knights, and advised by a powerful wizard, never existed. The Round Table and Merlin's sorcery are medieval literary inventions, romanticized additions. Still, beneath those legends, there seems to have been a historical core. A local war leader who achieved a significant military victory. This leader was later remembered in scattered literary references and evolving oral traditions. What really happened to the Knights Templars' fabled treasure is a question that has fascinated historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts for centuries. Formed around 1119, the Knights Templar were a Catholic military order charged with protecting Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. In time, they became known not only for their fierce martial prowess, but also for their significant wealth accumulated in the Levant. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the Templars had accrued immense wealth, acting as a kind of proto-banking institution for Europe's nobility. Also, to editorialize just slightly, the Templars were going to find out pretty soon what Biggie Smalls taught centuries later. Mo money equals mo problems. Yet when the order was forcibly disbanded in the early 14th century, their fortune seemed to vanish into thin air. Scholars have long struggled to provide a definitive answer, but while many theories abound, few are supported by solid evidence. During the height of their power, the Templars managed vast estates, farms, vineyards, ships, and a sophisticated financial network that spanned much of Christendom. They were entrusted with precious items and money from crusading lords and even kings. As such, the notion of a Templar treasure conjures images of chests packed with gold coins and jewels. But the historical record does not explicitly mention a massive single trove of treasure hidden away by the order. Instead, Templar wealth was typically spread across various commanderies and holdings in Europe and the Near East. The downfall of the Templars began in France, under King Philip IV, who was deeply in debt to the order. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, he orchestrated the arrest of key Templar leaders, accusing them of heresy and other grave crimes. Also, according to my research, this may be part of the reason why we associate Friday the 13th with bad omens. In the ensuing years, Templar possessions were seized or transferred. Crucially, a large part of Templar property went to the Knights Hospitallers, a rival military order also known as the Order of St. John, following a papal decree in 1312. But the question remains, did the Templars have a secret stash of gold and precious artifacts that was spirited away before the authorities could lay hands on it? Some early sources suggest Templars may have anticipated the crackdown. Some accounts mention carts leaving the Paris Temple, the order's headquarters, just before the arrests. These anecdotes have sparked theories that a portion of their treasury was removed and hidden. Yet no contemporary document confirms the existence of a large secret hoard. The Templars, being meticulous record keepers, didn't leave any unambiguous inventory that would hint at a concealed fortune. Moreover, what Templar wealth could have been liquid or portable might have been used to maintain their far-flung network of commanderies, to pay stipends, and to fund their military campaigns. Over time, legends have become entangled with fact. Early modern writers seized upon the mystery, and treasure hunters have speculated about the presence of Templar gold hidden in crypts, caves, or even transported overseas. The notion that the Templar treasure ended up in Scotland, supposedly enabling the Templars to assist Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, is one such popular tale. However, historians note that no credible contemporary sources link Templar wealth to that event. Similarly, claims that the treasure sailed to North America centuries before Columbus have no scholarly support. However, one popular story connects the treasure to the Oak Island money pit located on the island of the same name in Nova Scotia, Canada. Historians generally agree that it's most likely that the treasure never existed as a singular mythical cache. Instead, what we might call the Templar wealth comprised a network of resources: farmland, mills, churches, preceptories, and precious metal reserves. When the order was dissolved, The church and secular authorities meticulously appropriated and transferred this wealth. Naturally, significant corruption likely also led to a lot of the Templar wealth falling into private hands. Interestingly, the Templar treasure isn't even the most bizarre mystery surrounding them, and I'll be covering who or what they allegedly worshipped in a future episode of this series. The Man in the Iron Mask remains one of history's most enigmatic figures, a prisoner whose true identity and the reasons for his prolonged imprisonment continue to captivate centuries later. His story is intricately tied to the reign of King Louis XIV of France, under whose orders he was detained. The earliest records date the prisoner's confinement to July 1669, initially under the pseudonym Eustache Doger. He was held in custody for 34 years, with no contact whatsoever with the outside world aside from his jailer. He was also closely guarded by the same jailer, Saint-Mars, moving with him from prison to prison, eventually ending his days in the Bastille in 1703. The prisoner was known for the mask he reputedly wore, popularized as being made out of iron. Contrary to popular legend, historical accounts suggest it was more likely made of black velvet, less cruel, but equally effective at concealing the prisoner's identity. The conditions of the Man in the Iron Mask's imprisonment were designed to ensure total isolation. Historical documents indicate that he was moved several times between various prisons. The cells were specially modified to prevent eavesdropping, with multiple layers of doors to seal off any sound. Reports indicate he was well treated and wore fine clothes, suggesting his high status or the importance of the secrets he held. The severe restrictions placed upon him, including threats against speaking in isolation from other prisoners, suggest his keepers believed he held secrets that could potentially threaten the French state. However, given this, it is unclear why he wasn't simply eliminated, again suggesting some further importance to this man. Contemporary documents surfaced during the 19th century and included some of the correspondence between the jailer and his superiors. In these documents, the prisoner had been labeled, quote, only a valet shortly after his arrest, and that he was jailed for what he had seen, what he knew, and what he was employed to do. After his death, his cell was immediately stripped and whitewashed, and his belongings were destroyed, steps taken to ensure that his identity would remain hidden forever. The identity of the Man in the Iron Mask has spurred numerous theories. One prevailing theory posits he was an Italian count and diplomat named Ercole Mattioli, who was involved in diplomatic negotiations with Louis XIV and double-crossed the French king. His identity closely matches that of the man buried under the name Marchioli, leading some to speculate that the Italian count and the Man in the Iron Mask were one and the same. However, his known death date and some discrepancies in the timeline weaken this theory. Another popular candidate is the valet Eustache Dauger, arrested for reasons not fully documented, adding layers of mystery and speculation. Some historians speculate that the valet might have been involved in or privy to political scandals that required his permanent silence. This theory is supported by the specific instructions given to his jailer to prevent him from communicating with anyone except to express his immediate needs. However, this theory is weakened by the fact that if this had been the man's identity, he would have almost certainly been taken care of in the old-fashioned way. Yeah, you know what I mean. Taken behind the barn and given the old yeller treatment. Voltaire and later Alexandre Dumas were instrumental in cementing the legend of the Man in the Iron Mask, each adding their own speculative spins. Voltaire proposed theories that ranged from the prisoner being a twin brother to Louis XIV, to a disgraced nobleman or a disgruntled governmental official. Alexandre Dumas also explored the idea that the Man in the Iron Mask was the twin brother of Louis XIV. and likely contributed more to the popularization of the case than anyone. Their accounts and the dramatic flair they employed ensured that the story endured through the centuries as a blend of fact and elaborate fiction. Another theory proposed in the 20th century indicates that the man in the iron mask was actually Louis XIV's father. Notably, at the time of his birth, Louis XIV's parents had been largely, though not totally, estranged for over a decade. While this hypothetical situation does potentially make sense on paper, everything about the theory is circumstantial at best and speculative at worst. However, if this theory was true, it makes sense why the individual's face was always covered, as perhaps he bore a resemblance to Louis XIV. Further, it would explain the reluctance to simply end the man, as Louis XIV was a deeply religious man, and eliminating his father would likely have been considered unforgivable. In the end, the man in the iron mask endures as a timeless symbol of secrecy and intrigue, rooted in the political and social complexities of Louis XIV's France. Despite centuries of scholarship and debate, no single theory has conclusively revealed his identity or explained the extraordinary lengths taken to confine him and conceal his identity. Instead, his legacy thrives on the tension between scant historical records and the legends spun by historians, writers, and theorists. The disappearance of the 9th Hispana Legion is one of Roman history's greatest mysteries. Although the Legion was once a formidable military unit of the Roman Empire, by the early 2nd century AD, it seems to have vanished from the historical record. Attempts to pinpoint the exact moment of its disappearance, the reasons behind it, and the fate of its soldiers have all led to intense scholarly debate. The 9th Legion had a long and distinguished history. Formed by Julius Caesar, it participated in the Gallic Wars and fought in the Roman civil wars of the 1st century BC. Over time, it earned a reputation for its tenacity and effectiveness, a truly elite unit serving in various regions of the empire. By the late 1st century AD, the 9th was stationed in Roman Britain, where the empire was still trying to assert full control over the island's indigenous populations. A building inscription found at modern-day York, dated to around 108, is one of the last undisputed mentions of the 9th in Britain. In the early 20th century, historian Theodore Mommsen drew popular attention to the 9th's disappearance, suggesting that the Legion had been annihilated by tribes in northern Britain. He based his arguments on the absence of the Legion's name from later Roman military records, and the fact that subsequent legions were brought into Britain to bolster defenses. This idea, attractive to many, placed the blame squarely on a catastrophic military defeat, possibly at the hands of the Picts or other warlike tribes of the region. Early sources, however, are scant. The writings of Tacitus, who detailed Roman campaigns in Britain, don't provide conclusive evidence of such a disaster. Although he acknowledged the difficulties Roman forces faced in controlling the northern territories, no specific catastrophic defeat was mentioned. That said, this may not be determinative since Tacitus wrote about the Roman conquest of Britain around 100 AD, which was likely before the loss of the 9th Legion. Other key Roman historians who either lived during this period or wrote about this period failed to make mention of the 9th. Suetonius, who was a contemporary of the period when the Legion vanished, made no mention whatsoever of it. However, historians argue that Suetonius primarily focused on imperial biographies rather than broader military history, which may provide an explanation for his silence. Dio Cassius was born about half a century after the Legion vanished from the records. He was known to provide significant details about military campaigns, as well as Roman governance, so his silence on the disappearance of the 9th Legion is perhaps more surprising. Notably, of course, I need to mention that just because their extant records don't mention the 9th Legion, doesn't mean these historians, or other historians, didn't write about the vanishing. Ancient writings are notoriously fragmentary, with much of Roman historical literature lost over time due to decay, wars, fire, flooding, or selective preservation. Surviving works often reflect specific biases or priorities, such as glorifying emperors or significant events, while overlooking seemingly mundane details. If the ninth suffered a military defeat, which made an emperor or powerful family look incompetent, if it wasn't significant enough and happened in a remote place, it may not have made the record. It's important to remember that in ancient Rome, patronage was crucial for literary production of all types, including historical works. Wealthy patrons funded individuals like Tacitus and Suetonius for the purposes of glorifying their own names, families, and causes. This could be another reason for the lack of any meaningful mention of what happened to this legion. Others have speculated that since the legion was raised by Julius Caesar, who was by then a very much divine and near mythical figure, its destruction or disbanding could have hurt morale. In the absence of direct ancient testimony about the legion's fate, historians have turned to indirect clues. One line of reasoning points to a reorganization of Roman forces in Britain around the early 2nd century. Between AD 108 and the mid-120s, the Roman military underwent significant changes in northern Britain. Most importantly, this included the construction of Hadrian's Wall, built from AD 122, and the shifting of legions from one province to another. Some argue the ninth was not destroyed in Britain, but rather transferred to another frontier, possibly the Rhine or the Danube. Notably, there's evidence from Germania Inferior showing members of the Ninth Legion were transferred there. While some have argued that this indicates that the legion itself was definitively moved there, this is simply circumstantial evidence to suggest some members ended up serving there. It's been argued that the Ninth Legion might have met its end in conflicts on the European mainland in one of these frontier areas. Others suggest the legion could have been redeployed to the east, where tensions with Parthia and later the Bar Kokhba revolt might have led to its obliteration or absorption. When it comes to the ninth, the main puzzle is that no direct, undisputed record explains the circumstances of its departure. The Roman Empire's administrative systems were generally good at tracking legions, their bases, and their movements, which makes the ninth's disappearance all the more perplexing. Perhaps the legion was quietly disbanded, or maybe its records were simply lost. It's also possible that no ancient writer saw fit to chronicle its end, assuming it to be an unremarkable administrative detail rather than a grand event deserving of special mention. For instance, one of the prevailing theories that I briefly mentioned previously is that it was simply absorbed into other legions. Solving the mystery of the Ninth Roman Legion requires breakthroughs in archaeology or the discovery of new ancient writings. Archaeological evidence, such as inscriptions, military artifacts, or graves, could provide insights into the legion's fate, particularly if found in Britain, the Rhine, or the Danube regions. Similarly, uncovering previously unknown Roman texts or fragments, such as military records or correspondence, might shed light on the legion's movements or demise. Advances in technology, like ground-penetrating radar or tool-assisted manuscript analysis, enhance the chances of such discoveries. These tools could one day finally reveal whether the ninth fell in battle or faded administratively. On May 26, 1828, an adolescent boy with a strange demeanor appeared in the streets of Nuremberg, Germany, claiming to have been raised in near-total isolation. This boy would come to be known to the world as Caspar Hauser. Since then, countless theories have been put forward regarding Hauser's background, his identity, and the circumstances of his baffling arrival. The historical details of Caspar Hauser's first appearance are well documented. According to sources, a shoemaker encountered a teenage boy wandering the streets of Nuremberg, seemingly confused and barely able to speak. He carried with him a letter addressed to the captain of the local cavalry regiment. Within the letter, it was stated that the boy had been raised in isolation, never allowed to leave the house, and had been taught only to write his name. He had been taught to repeat a single phrase, which is generally translated from German as, "I want to be a cavalryman, as my father was." At the time, his age was estimated at about 16 years old. Soon after his discovery, the boy was taken into police custody. When questioned, he identified himself, awkwardly and haltingly, as Caspar Hauser. He had difficulty walking and appeared to have limited knowledge of the world. Those who examined him noted that he behaved like a much younger child and seemed unfamiliar with everyday objects and social norms. This combination of innocence and confusion led to widespread speculation. Was Hauser a missing child from a noble family? Was he a victim of kidnapping and prolonged confinement? Or was he, as some skeptics claimed, simply a clever charlatan exploiting public sympathy? The intrigue surrounding Caspar Hauser deepened as more people became involved in his care and education. One of his initial benefactors was Friedrich Daumer, a local schoolmaster and philosopher. Under Daumer's tutelage, Hauser made remarkable progress in reading, writing, drawing, and playing music. He seemed eager to learn, and his intelligence, combined with his startling backstory, attracted international attention. European newspapers picked up his tale, and he became something of a celebrity. One of the central theories that emerged over time was that Caspar Hauser was in fact of noble birth. Specifically, some believed he was the hereditary prince of Baden, switched at birth for a dying infant, and later imprisoned to prevent his claim to the throne. According to this theory, his mysterious captors raised him in a small, darkened room, depriving him of normal human contact, all to ensure he could not pose a threat to the succession. Proponents of this idea argued that his appearance in Nuremberg was orchestrated by unknown conspirators, or perhaps the boy himself managed to escape. Supporters cited circumstantial evidence and rumored similarities in facial features between Hauser and members of the Baden royal family. Further, if this was the case, he would have been the son of a cavalry officer, which was in line with what he was taught to say. Another line of thinking posits that Caspar Hauser was simply a foundling with a fabricated backstory. Skeptics have suggested that his story was too perfect, too tailored for sensational intrigue, and that his supposed ignorance of everyday life was exaggerated. Some contemporaries argued that he might have been a clever impostor seeking fame and fortune. He gave different accounts of his upbringing over time, and some of his recollections were vague or self-contradictory. Critics point out that if Hauser had been truly raised in almost total darkness and isolation, he would have had far more severe health problems, such as rickets or serious vision issues. Further, he would have almost certainly been completely nonverbal due to lack of socialization in his formative years. This, of course, wouldn't have been known in the early 19th century, as the understanding of the brain and psychology was virtually non-existent. Still, others have argued for a more psychologically complex explanation, suggesting that Caspar Hauser may have been mentally ill or that he'd experienced severe trauma earlier in life. His inconsistent stories might not have been deliberate lies, but rather the result of memory issues or trauma-induced confusion. Without modern psychological evaluations, it's difficult to assess his mental state. Supporters of Hauser's authenticity cite that he genuinely seemed bewildered by the world and had unusual sensitivities, such as difficulty tolerating certain foods and lights. These could align with a person who'd lived in a controlled environment. A number of unusual incidents occurred surrounding Hauser. In October 1829, he was found bleeding and claimed that he had been attacked by an unknown assailant. In April 1830, he claimed a weapon discharged into his head by accident, but local physicians noted that the wound was extremely minor. Many thought this was another attempt to garner attention or sympathy. Notably, these incidents did attract more attention, and a British nobleman, Lord Stanhope, would take an interest in him. Lord Stanhope attempted to prove that he was perhaps the runaway son of a Hungarian noblewoman who fabricated the entire story. On December 14th, 1833, he was lured to the Ansbach court garden under the pretext of receiving crucial information about his identity. There, he was stabbed by an unknown assailant and died 3 days later from his injuries. This sudden and violent end fueled further speculation. Those who believed in the princely origin hypothesis claimed it was a political slaying intended to silence him forever. Skeptics retorted that he may have done it himself to keep his name in the public eye, but that he may have gone too far. Given the extremely limited forensic science and investigative techniques of the time, the truth remains elusive. In the centuries since, Caspar Hauser's story has persisted in literature, film, and scholarly debates. Modern historians, with the help of archival research and improved forensic techniques, have attempted to shed new light on his identity. In 1996, a study compared hair and body samples from items historically attributed to Hauser with DNA samples from descendants of the House of Baden. At the time, no definitive results could be reached. In 2024, modern DNA sequencing techniques were used and have likely definitively ruled out Caspar Hauser as a member of the House of Baden. Notably, there's some dispute whether the DNA samples from Hauser are actually associated with him, given the 2 centuries that passed and uncertain chains of custody. While it's now clear that Caspar Hauser likely wasn't a hereditary prince, this does little to solve the question of who exactly he was, and the mystery thus remains. In March 1944, Western Australia experienced a significant military mobilization known as the Western Australian Emergency. This event was triggered by reports suggesting that Japanese naval forces intended to attack the Perth and Fremantle areas. In response, Allied forces rapidly reinforced the region's defenses. Fremantle, located near Perth, was a crucial port during World War II. Initially, it served as an assembly point for Allied convoys traveling between Australia, the Middle East, and Europe. Following the outbreak of the Pacific War, Fremantle became a key operating and maintenance base for United States Navy submarines. Established in March 1942, the Fremantle submarine base eventually became the U.S. Navy's second-largest submarine base after Pearl Harbor. Submarines from the Royal Netherlands Navy and the Royal Navy also operated from Fremantle, contributing significantly to the offensive against Japanese shipping. Over the course of the war, submarines conducted over 300 combat patrols from the port. Despite its strategic value, the Perth-Fremantle area was geographically isolated, leading to concerns about its vulnerability to Japanese attacks. These fears peaked in March 1942 after Japan's rapid advance through Southeast Asia. Although several towns in northern Australia were bombed, Perth and Fremantle were not directly attacked. Nevertheless, apprehensions persisted. On March 5, 1944, the Australian government and military received an incorrect report that 2 Imperial Japanese Navy battleships had entered the Indian Ocean. Intelligence reported that they were possibly moving to attack Fremantle and Perth. In response, Allied forces in Western Australia were rapidly reinforced. The region's defenses were fully manned, air patrols off the coast were increased, and the 5 U.S. Navy submarines at the Fremantle submarine base were ordered to patrol the expected route. The Royal Australian Air Force's Western Area Command improved the readiness of its forces near Perth. Further, a variety of units were redeployed to Western Australia to face this upcoming threat. On March 10, 1994, air raid sirens rang out in Fremantle and Perth, though no air raid came. By March 20th, 1944, it became evident that the perceived threat had not materialized. The air reinforcements that had been sent to Western Australia returned to their bases, and naval units resumed their normal operations. The leading theory is that the Western Australian emergency of March 1944 was primarily the result of miscommunication and intelligence errors. Under this theory, the incorrect report about Japanese battleships entering the Indian Ocean led to a large-scale mobilization. Some historians suggest that such false alarms were not uncommon during the war, as both sides engaged in deception and misinformation tactics. While the official narrative holds that the Western Australian emergency stemmed from faulty intelligence, some have suggested a more clandestine theory. According to this line of reasoning, Japanese naval or special operations units may have penetrated regional waters closer to Western Australia's strategic ports than previously admitted. Given the strategic importance of Fremantle as the United States Navy's second-largest submarine base after Pearl Harbor, operational security would have been paramount. Any successful Japanese infiltration there, even a minor one, would have risked undermining confidence in the Allies' ability to secure Australia's western flank. Thus, a top priority would have been to swiftly eliminate the threat and ensure that no alarmist reports reached the populace. In order to maintain morale and public support on the Australian home front, authorities would have had strong incentives to completely obscure such an event. News of even a small-scale Japanese intrusion might have reminded Australians of earlier attacks on their soil and maritime zones. Throughout the war, northern parts of Australia, such as Darwin, Broome, and other coastal towns, had been subject to bombing raids and reconnaissance flights. The memory of these incursions loomed large. Residents knew that Japanese forces had the capacity and willingness to strike the Australian mainland. Admitting to a successful Japanese penetration of Australian waters, however fleeting or ultimately unsuccessful, might have handed the enemy a propaganda victory. All that said, the declassification and public release of archival records, including military communications and intelligence reports, make it increasingly unlikely anything was concealed. More likely than not, the Western Australian emergency can be explained through a mixture of faulty intelligence reports and a populace and military suffering from war exhaustion. The disappearance of the Norse settlements in Greenland remains one of medieval history's most compelling mysteries. These settlements, established by Eric the Red around the late 10th century, flourished for several hundred years before vanishing without any definitive explanation. In 986, Eric the Red, an Icelandic outlaw, established the first Norse settlement in Greenland after being exiled from Iceland. His descriptions of Greenland as a fertile and lush land encouraged settlers to join him, despite the island's harsh climate. These settlers founded two primary colonies, the eastern settlement near modern-day Qaqortoq and the western settlement near Nuuk. At its peak, the Norse population in Greenland was estimated to be as high as 5,000 individuals, though estimates vary wildly. The settlers were primarily farmers who raised livestock such as cattle, sheep, and goats. They're thought to have supplemented their diet with seals, fish, and seabirds. Archaeological evidence, including church ruins and farmsteads, shows that the Norse built sophisticated communities with European-style architecture. Christianity was a cornerstone of their society, with stone churches and even a bishopric established in Greenland by the early 12th century. Despite their initial success, the Norse faced significant challenges. Greenland's marginal environment was far less hospitable than Eric the Red had portrayed. The settlers dealt with short growing seasons, nutrient-poor soils, and a climate that was always on the edge of being too cold for farming. Nevertheless, for several centuries, they managed to adapt, relying on trade and hunting for survival. By the late 13th century, however, environmental and economic conditions began to deteriorate. The medieval warm period, which had allowed for farming in Greenland, transitioned into the Little Ice Age, a period of global cooling that made the island's already challenging environment even harsher. The growing seasons shortened, and sea ice made trade and travel increasingly difficult. With fewer ships arriving from Iceland and Scandinavia, the Norse became more isolated, losing access to essential goods like iron and timber. By the 15th century, the Norse settlements in Greenland were abandoned. Several theories have been proposed to explain their disappearance, each backed by varying levels of evidence. The Little Ice Age is often cited as a key factor. With colder temperatures, farming became less viable, and the Norse struggled to feed their livestock. Overgrazing and deforestation likely exacerbated the environmental challenges, leading to soil erosion and reduced agricultural output. Archaeological evidence shows a shift in their diet from domesticated animals to seal meat, indicating that the settlers were increasingly reliant on hunting as farming became unsustainable. The Norse economy in Greenland depended heavily on trade with Europe, particularly for luxury goods like walrus ivory, which was exchanged for supplies. However, the rise of alternative trade routes and the decline in demand for walrus-based ivory diminished Greenland's importance in European markets. As trade diminished, the settlers lost access to critical resources that couldn't be locally produced. The arrival of the Inuit Thule culture, who migrated into Greenland around the 13th century, may have created tension. While the two groups interacted, there's evidence of Inuit tools in Norse sites and vice versa. Some researchers suggest competition for resources could have led to conflict. That said, there's only circumstantial evidence that the groups engaged in any meaningful form of conflict. For instance, Norse weaponry has been found at Inuit sites, which some have speculated indicates some form of conflict, or raiding by the Inuit against the Norse. However, detractors of this theory point out that this could just as easily be explained as being the result of trade rather than any form of conflict. Another prominent theory is that the Norse didn't simply disappear, but instead were absorbed into Inuit communities. Under this theory, the Norse who didn't integrate into Inuit communities ultimately returned to their ancestral homelands in Iceland and Scandinavia. The mystery surrounding the disappearance of the Norse has given rise to numerous speculative theories as well. One such legend suggests that the Norse settlers fell victim to an apocalyptic event, such as a massive storm or plague. One particularly persistent theory claims the Norse were annihilated by Inuit warriors in a sudden and brutal conflict. While this theory is popular, archaeological evidence and written historical record indicate that conflicts between the two groups were likely limited to raids if they occurred at all. Another theory, again not grounded in evidence, posits that the Norse may have ventured westward and reached North America, where they eventually blended into indigenous populations. English sweating sickness was a mysterious and deadly condition that struck England and later parts of Europe during the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance period. It first appeared in 1485 and recurred in several outbreaks until it vanished in 1551. The first outbreak coincided with the end of the Wars of the Roses and the rise of Henry VII to the English throne. The disease caused widespread panic as it quickly claimed thousands of lives, including notable figures such as two Lord Mayors of London and several members of the English nobility. Henry VIII was deeply fearful of the disease, and it influenced his policies and movements throughout his reign. His elder brother Arthur, Prince of Wales, is suspected to have died from the illness in 1502, which dramatically altered the line of succession in English history. Also, as a quick aside, the Tudors, being of Welsh origin, chose the name Arthur as the heir apparent to the English throne. This is thought to have been an attempt to enhance a Welsh claim over the English throne. Also, it raises the question as to what regnal number would have been used for a 16th century King Arthur. But I digress. Let's get back to the mystery. The disease was marked by sudden and severe symptoms, starting with a sense of dread, followed by cold shivers, intense sweating, headache, severe body pains, and exhaustion. The initial trembling and high fever were followed by profuse sweating and a rapid decline into extreme fatigue and thirst. Unlike the bubonic plague, the sweating sickness did not cause visible sores or rashes, which added to its mysterious nature. Treatments of the time, based on the humoral theory of medicine, involved wrapping patients in heavy blankets to induce sweating and avoiding certain foods and mists thought to be harmful. If a patient survived the first 24 hours, they had a good chance of recovery, but many succumbed within that critical period. Despite its terrifying grip on Tudor England, the sweating sickness remains less well known than other historical epidemics like the Black Death. Its sudden disappearance after 1551 only adds to the mystery. The disease's swift vanishing act left a legacy of fear and speculation, influencing literature and popular culture long after it had gone. For instance, Shakespeare's play Henry IV Part II mentions a character dying of a sweat, potentially reflecting the lingering memory of the disease in the public consciousness. Over the centuries, numerous theories have been proposed regarding the cause of the sweating sickness. Some historians and scientists speculate that it could have been a form of hantavirus, which also presents with rapid onset fever and respiratory distress. These viruses are primarily found in rodents, and humans can contract the disease through direct contact with a variety of rodent-related sources, including their droppings. Others have proposed that the outbreaks could have been caused by anthrax poisoning. In favor of this theory, it's speculated that spores from this bacterium might have contaminated raw wool or animal carcasses, infecting people who came into contact with these materials. Another theory points towards enteroviruses. Enteroviruses are a group of viruses that typically enter the body through the gastrointestinal tract and can cause a range of diseases. They're known for their ability to cause sudden epidemics with high fever and systemic symptoms, aligning with historical accounts of the sweating sickness. Some researchers suggest that an unknown or extinct strain of enterovirus might have been responsible for the outbreaks, given the rapid onset and resolution of the disease. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just quickly reminding you to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Now let's get back to the content. Originating in 12th century England, The Green Children of Woolpit is a contemporaneous tale that describes two mysterious children who appeared in the village of Woolpit in Suffolk, England. Their unusual green-tinted skin, incomprehensible language, and peculiar habits have inspired numerous interpretations, ranging from plausible to the fantastical. The story is primarily recorded in two medieval chronicles, Ralph of Coggeshall's Chronicon Anglicanum and William of Newburgh's Historia Rerum Anglicarum. Both authors were contemporaries of the events, lending the tale a degree of credibility, though their writings are often laced with the embellishments typical of medieval chroniclers. According to the accounts, the events took place during the reign of King Stephen, who reigned between 1135 and 1154. Woolpit, the village at the center of the legend, derived its name from the wolf pits that were used to trap wolves. Personally, I think they should have kept the name Wolf Pit because it sounds ridiculously metal, but I suppose that wasn't a determinative factor circa the 12th century. The story begins when two children, a boy and a girl, were discovered near said wolf pits. They were reportedly found by villagers who were harvesting crops. The children's skin was described as being green in color, their clothing was strange and unfamiliar, and they spoke an unintelligible language. The villagers brought them to the home of Sir Richard de Calne, a local landowner, where they were cared for. Initially, the children refused to eat any food offered to them, displaying an aversion to all common medieval fare. However, they eventually ate raw green beans, which were likely a staple in the diet of agricultural communities at the time. As they adapted to their new environment, their greenish hue faded, and they began to eat a broader diet. Unfortunately, the boy grew ill and died shortly after, while the girl survived, was baptized, and provided her account of the life of her and her brother. After learning the local language, the surviving girl revealed an astonishing tale. She claimed that she and her brother came from a land called St. Martin's Land, a place of perpetual twilight. According to her, everyone in St. Martin's Land had green skin, like theirs. She described how they were herding their father's cattle when they heard a loud noise, which transported them to the strange world of Woolpit. They wandered in confusion until they were discovered by the villagers. The girl eventually assimilated into English society, marrying a local man and living a relatively ordinary life. Her later years are undocumented, but her earlier testimony left an indelible mark on medieval folklore. The tale of the Green Children has been the subject of intense scrutiny and debate for almost a millennium now. Historians, folklorists, and scientists have proposed numerous explanations, ranging from plausible historical scenarios to imaginative speculative theories. One of the most widely accepted theories is that the children were Flemish immigrants. During the 12th century, a large number of Flemish settlers lived in England, many of whom faced persecution. These Flemish communities often spoke Dutch or other Germanic dialects, which would have sounded incomprehensible to the English-speaking villagers. The green tint of their skin could have been caused by malnutrition, specifically anemia, exacerbated by their dietary habits. The children's description of St. Martin's Land may have referred to an actual location in Flanders, or been distorted through translation and time. Another theory suggests that the children were suffering from a medical condition. Chlorosis, also known as green sickness, was a type of anemia prevalent in medieval times. Iron deficiency can give the skin a pale or greenish hue, aligning with the descriptions in the story. Once the children began eating a more varied diet, the girl's health improved, and her skin tone returned to normal, supporting this hypothesis. Under this theory, the children were likely local English children who had been abandoned in this malnourished state. Further, their initial garbled speech is explained as being caused by severe malnutrition. Supernatural or folkloric interpretations of the events are also common, and have been for as long as the mystery was known about. In medieval England, tales of fairies and supernatural beings were widespread. The Green Children's story fits into the larger context of folklore involving mysterious beings from otherworldly realms. The perpetual twilight of St. Martin's Land recalls descriptions of the fairy world, which was often depicted as being beneath the earth. Their green skin could symbolize their otherworldly origins. In modern times, the Green Children have been reinterpreted through the lens of what I will very loosely term science fiction-based ideas. Some have suggested that they were extraterrestrial beings who accidentally arrived on Earth. Others have suggested that they were from an alternative dimension, or were time travelers who slipped through time from some dystopian future where the sun is blocked out. Still others have speculated that the Green Children of Woolpit is a retelling of a local legend by chroniclers who didn't understand the cultural context of the story. Check out my alternative channels, Lazy Chill Zone and Lazy Chill True Crime, for more content. If you want to support my work further, please consider checking out the YouTube membership or Patreon.